What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. For a lot of you, the trade deadline has already passed, and so we're not going to be doing any more trade videos. Instead, this whole video will be going over different backfield situations that you guys wanted me to touch on. And boy, are there a lot for us to go over this week. A lot of things have happened, a lot of very interesting changes in workloads. So I'll be going over my thoughts on those here. If your trade deadline has not passed yet, maybe you don't have one, I know there are a few leagues who don't, then this is still going to help you because these are backfields that either you might already own or you're looking to trade for. But remember, at this point in the season, we're trying to acquire as many studs as possible, effectively trading away any bench we have, any depth we have, because depth does not matter at all anymore. We're only looking at how good we make our starting line. So we'll go over these situations in a minute, but first, gotta start things off with the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was which wide receiver leads the league in end zone targets, and the answer is Adam Thielen, and Joe Haynes was the first to get that one right. Today's stat, Alvin Kamara has the most receiving yards among running backs. Who has the second most? So let's go over the different situations you guys asked me to break down. Also remember, there are timestamps at the bottom of the screen, so you can always see how long I talk about certain players, when I'm going to talk about certain guys, and if you only want a breakdown of like 3 players I'm going to talk about, we'll just skip to those points. If you don't want to hear me talk about a player, don't listen to me talk about a player. So today we're going to go over Jonathan Taylor, then the Dolphins running backs, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, J.K. Dobbins, and then both Zeke and Kamara for effectively opposite reasons, but we'll get to that in a minute. Any other questions you guys have is going to have to be answered in the running back start sit video that goes out on Thanksgiving. And also the video tomorrow is going to be the exact same thing for wide receiver. So if you have a wide receiver you want me to talk about, put it in the comment section. So we start off. Jonathan Taylor finally has his breakout. I put it in quotes because it's not that like he had this monster performance for yardage and touchdown. He actually didn't even score a touchdown. But it was the volume. You know, going into last week, Taylor had touch counts of 16, 13, 8, 9 over the last month. But he had 26 touches against the Packers on Sunday, gaining 114 yards. Again, did not score the touchdown, although it's worth noting he did have a touchdown called back due to a penalty. This backfield split, what we experienced yesterday was, or I guess yesterday for me, 2 days ago for you guys, was exactly what we'd been talking about. I mean, going into last week, I mentioned we watch Hines. He gets 56% of the snaps in week 10. Looks incredible. Looks like effectively they're featured back. 17 touches. We compare that to 9 touches for Taylor. But then we go to this Sunday and we're like, okay, we saw Hines dominate. And there were actually reports that they were going to feature Hines. I don't think anyone believed those reports, but those reports were out there. And people may have thought that it was possible. But we went into the week saying, this is happening. We're seeing Hines be featured, and Wilkins be featured, and Taylor be featured. It could be anyone, and this is a great matchup. We kind of said that it favored Jonathan Taylor and Wilkins a little bit more than Hines because this was a spot where the Colts were likely to attack on the ground, and when we get spots where they're more likely to attack through the air, it's more likely that Hines will be the one to break out. But we said that it could be any of these guys. So one word of caution I want with this Jonathan Taylor breakout is that literally last week we saw it be Hines, and a few weeks ago we saw it be Wilkins. And so while it is entirely possible that they looked at this and said, you know what, Jonathan Taylor is our guy, we're going to feature Jonathan Taylor the rest of the season. That's possible. But what's also possible is that he just is better than Wilkins today, and he was working better than Hines was, and they decided that today is going to be Jonathan Taylor's turn to be the feature back. Wilkins is kind of being phased out a little bit. We see these last 2 weeks, he played just 23 total snaps, getting 8 and 5 touches. So if I had to say what's most likely, I still think that it's Jonathan Taylor and Hines that are very likely going to be the 2 guys. One of them is going to be the lead back each week. And we are starting to see every week Taylor's getting that chance. So if we look back to the Titans game, Hines broke out in that game because they gave Taylor a chance early in the game. He wasn't that great. They gave Wilkins a few touches. He wasn't that great. But whenever they were playing Hines, he was doing phenomenal. And so they rolled with Hines. But it's worth noting again that game and the game before, they let Taylor start. And they said, can you produce in this game? He kind of didn't, and that's why they went to Hines in week 10. But then we roll into week 11, and Taylor was playing pretty well, and Hines was playing pretty poorly. And so it is more likely, at least each week, that Taylor is still going to get that first opportunity to perform well. Does that mean this is going to happen every week where he has, 26 touches on Sunday? No. There's probably going to be a week in here where we're expecting him to go off and he's going to get 10 touches. So you can't trust him fully. But I have more confidence in him after this performance than I did going into this week, because now we've seen it. We've seen them give him a lot of a workload. We've seen them use him late in games. Remember, he has these fumbling issues. We were like, maybe they weren't going to trust him late, and so his touch count could only be so high. They used him late in the game when it was a very, very important part of the game. And so I trust him more. Remember, I have him in 1 out of 4 leagues. That doesn't mean I'm going to start him this next week. I could still keep him on the bench. It's basically going to be him and Ayuk for me, and I don't yet know what my decision will be. But I think now that he's had this performance, he did look pretty well in it. I think I have more confidence in Taylor going forward. But again, understand the risk. It is still a play I would much prefer to make in the flex and not in one of my running back spots. Next up, we have the Dolphins backfield, where Ahmed has been playing really great recently, but there's a little bit to unpack here, because originally when we had Tua take over for Fitz, we believed that there was no way they were making this change if Tua wasn't ready, right? I mean, they were looking at him in practice. The team was playing well. The team was on pace to make the playoffs. There was no way they're taking Fitz out and putting Tua in if he's not fully ready, because they just didn't need to. So we thought he was ready. He has not been phenomenal. He's been solid, but he's not really the reason they were on this win streak. It has been more the defense, more other players than Tua. And then we see in this last game, he gets benched. And while it could have been partially the knee and the ankle, whatever, on that sack that he had, he kind of got banged up. Listen, there were no trainers around him for a large portion of the game. He wasn't hurt that badly. Now, maybe something will come out and I'm proven wrong on this one, but you got to think, this kid is the future of the franchise. If something was wrong with him, that he would have been getting treatment, he would have been in the locker room, something would have happened. It is more likely he was playing poorly, he gets this sack, and they're like, listen, you're not playing that well, let's put Fitzpatrick in there, because again, they are in the playoff hunt. This is a team that thinks they can make the playoffs. You want to win these games, and Tua just did not look good. And that's kind of been a theme for these running backs, is that they keep giving one of these backs a lot of volume, but they've been playing better under Fitzpatrick, because Tua hadn't really been throwing all that much to the running backs, and also they're playing extremely slow. And so the total play volume in Dolphins games has been lower. We see when a team has fewer plays in total, when they have, the Dolphins have been playing well, but they're obviously not, high-end offense where there's going to be touchdowns to go around every week. They're not the Chiefs, they're not the Saints. They're a good offense, just not an elite one. And so when you don't have an elite offense, lower play volume, and they're not getting targets to running backs, Ahmed and Gaskin can produce under those circumstances when it's only one of them active, but their upside is much lower. The floor is much lower when they don't score. And now what happens when Gaskin comes back? Because he's eligible to return this week. Well, he was great. He was doing phenomenal. So there's no way Ahmed is just going to be the guy and going to say, oh, sorry, Gaskin, he's playing well. No, Gaskin's going to come back. But then Ahmed's playing good enough to where it's like, okay, if you have Gaskin, well, you got to realize he's not coming back and playing 90% of the snaps. And so if there's going to be even remotely a split, that's awful for fantasy, because the targets have been lower. And again, targets lower, play volume lower. Now you're going to split, and they already had a pretty weak offensive line. It's a really tough situation. So if Tua remains the quarterback and we see Gaskin comes back and both him, Ahmed, and Breida are all active on game days, that's a really difficult situation for me to trust. And so I would want to see it play out for the week. So we'll see. Maybe we get reports later this week. Is Gaskin coming back, yes or no? And so we can kind of make a determination on what to do with him come Sunday. But if he's back and Tua remains the starter, then I might want to see how this split works out for a week before I'm willing to put them in. And that stinks, of course, because he was playing so well. He was getting the targets. He was getting 70, 80, 90% of the snaps. So it's really unfortunate that if he comes back, he might not be as fantasy viable, but it's possible. And because these are such important weeks, unless you really need one of these guys, and this is for everyone in the Dolphins backfield, unless you truly need to play them, I would not in the first week back for Gaskin. I just want to see how it's played out. Next up, Clyde. And we've got a little bit of a brighter future on this one. He played 51% of the snaps, and he saw his most work since Bell joined the team a few weeks ago, gaining 77 yards on 15 touches while also scoring twice. He has seen his volume drop since Bell was signed, but he's also been getting really unlucky with touchdowns going into that, and it's kind of weird now that Bell signs. Now the reverse is happening. Now he's getting pretty lucky with touchdowns. He scored 4 touchdowns over the last 4 weeks. Kind of a weird thing, but it just shows you how random touchdowns are. When he was the only guy, he was getting insanely unlucky. Now he's not the only guy, and now the touchdowns are going in his favor. But now, after these 4 touchdowns in 4 weeks, getting a good amount of volume this last week, he ranks as running back 9 on the season. Now, in points per game, I think he's closer to 15, 16. He's been more of a mid-range running back too. But it's interesting to know. You throw in the touchdowns, and now he is fantasy relevant. But I'm sure a lot of people were more excited than just the touchdowns, because if you watch that game, it was pretty clear that he was the lead back. He touched the ball on 6 of the first 12 plays in the game, whereas Bell didn't have a touch until very late in the second quarter. Almost at halftime was the first time he had a touch. It was very, very clear that Clyde was the lead back. And this is reminiscent of something we've talked about over these last few weeks, that rookies typically break out in the second half of the season. Not everyone is James Robinson and just dominates from week 1 on. Sometimes it takes teams a little bit to feature their rookies. We have seen a lot this season that we weren't expecting. We saw a limited off season, and then all of a sudden all these rookie wide receivers are dominating right from the beginning of the season. But in general, we don't see this. We see second half of the season was when running backs and wide receivers usually break out for teams, and especially going into this season, limited offseason, we thought that was going to be extraordinarily the case. And very recently, we have seen Jonathan Taylor, Clyde, Swift, Dobbins, who we'll get to in a second, all getting more and more workload as the season progresses, to the point where last week it looked like Swift was going to be the feature back. He suffered the concussion, but when he comes back, we expect him to be the feature back. We're seeing Clyde operate as a featured back this week. We're seeing Dobbins, as I'll get to again, operating as a featured back for the Ravens. Taylor, maybe that's in his cards over the next few weeks. And so I want us to realize that even though we've been gifted with some of these phenomenal wide receivers, we've been talking about this. The second half of the season is what it is for these rookie running backs. And it looks like their time is now. It looks like Clyde might be the lead back of the Chiefs to close the season. And while that's not going to lead to 20 touches a game, it's going to lead to a lot of scoring opportunity, some reception upside, some yardage upside. And he's got to be treated as a low-end 1 to a high-end 2 moving forward. But speaking of these breakout rookies, I think that the workload for J.K. Dobbins was the most encouraging in the week. So it was very exciting to see Clyde featured, very excited that Jonathan Taylor got this workload. But what they did with Dobbins was something that we were hoping they would do for the entire season. Every single week, it has been just absolutely insane that they're giving any sort of workload to Gus Edwards and Mark Ingram. I mean, it has been very, very clear that Dobbins is the vastly superior running back in that backfield, and that played itself out this past week, and they made the switch. Ingram handled 2 carries and 0 targets on 6 snaps. Mark Ingram had 6 snaps this last week. It was not a blowout. This game went to overtime. This was a game that was competitive the entire way through, and they looked at their backfield and they say, Ingram, you get 2 touches, 6 snaps. Gus Edwards, you get 3 touches, 13 snaps. We're going to feature J.K. Dobbins for 17 touches, 41 snaps, and he's going to be our featured back. And as per John Daigle, no running back on the Ravens had 16 plus touches or 52% or more of the backfield touches in any game this season. Well, Dobbins had 17 touches, 77% of the running back touches for the Ravens this week. That is the workload of a featured running back. Featured running backs get 77% of their backfield's touches. And if he's going to continue to average 5 yards per carry, then he's going to be a league winner. Everyone over the summer was pointing this out. If Dobbins ever turns into the featured back this season or into the future, he is going to win people leagues. And I am not saying that he's going to have 77% of the volume every week moving forward. It is entirely possible that we see this go back closer to just a third for all three of these guys. But given that this game was so competitive throughout, and given that he has been the best running back, is clearly the most talented, they have so much draft capital invested in him, they're very excited about him, and now they give him this sort of workload, it seems like the most likely scenario is that he's going to be the feature back to close the season, and that's going to win a lot of people their leagues, especially since he's got this tough matchup with the Steelers this week, but then he faces the Browns, Jaguars, and Giants to close the season. That isn't necessarily the three best matchups for running backs, but they're going to be favorites in all those games, and they should be big home favorites in the final two. And so if you held on to him, you're about to be rewarded. The final running backs we'll go over are Ezekiel Elliott and Alvin Kamara. And like I said to start the video, it's for different reasons. Zeke had been struggling, but he finally ended his 4-game scoreless streak this week, and he had a really nice performance going over 100 yards as well, over 100 yards on the ground even. Meanwhile, we see Kamara was dominating, but he was held without a catch for the first time in his 60-game career, entirely due to the fact that they had a quarterback change, going from Drew Brees to Taysom Hill. After, of course, the injury to Brees, not a benching, obviously. So we'll start with Zeke. I have the exact same take that I did last week. I don't care what the performance was this Sunday. It's the same take. He's going to see 17 to 20 touches on average each week. 1 to 3 of those will come through the air on a team that is not going to score all that many touchdowns this season. Now, he performed better this week, and while a lot of that was probably due to coming off the bye, we usually see teams play better coming after their bye, I also think that what we saw earlier in the season from Dalton before his concussion, before having COVID, I think he's better than what we saw, and I think we saw that play out this Sunday. But we have a running back getting a lot of volume, not much of it through the air, although a little bit of it through the air, and not that much touchdown upside. That means he's going to be a 2. I think it's the exact same thing. You cannot call Ezekiel Elliott running back 1 moving forward because the touchdowns, receptions, and potentially total yardage will just not be there to make him a 1. But he's a running back too, because any running back getting 17 to 20 touches a game, now we're going to see spikes like we saw 22, 23 this week. We could see in games where they're trailing, where they're not playing as well, him be closer to like 14, 15. But in that 17 to 20 range, being relatively inefficient with those, it doesn't really matter what you do though, you're a 2. He's a running back 2 moving forward. If you can trade, that's the value. Like I said last week, if someone views him as a 1, you're selling him because that's not what he is. If someone views him more as a flex, you're buying because that's not what he is. He's a running back 2. As for Kamara, it's a little tough, because he is just a smash play every single week, regardless of matchup, when Brees is the quarterback. But he gets so much of his value off of receptions that if Taysom Hill is not going to target him, 0 receptions for Alvin Kamara, like, what are you doing, Taysom? That doesn't make any sense. But if that's not going to happen, his value takes a massive hit. So what do we know from this situation? Brees can return in week 14, but it seems much more likely that he's eyeing week 15, could be week 15 or week 16. It's just how he recovers. We can't possibly predict it, but week 14 at the earliest, most likely returns week 15 or week 16. That is very, very bad news for Kamara owners, just because you couldn't have predicted this, but his value is going to take a massive hit because of an injury to his quarterback. And I do think the 0 receptions is a fluke. I would be very surprised if moving forward he just averaged 0 and 1 reception while Brees is out, because I mean, we saw Latavius Murray have 2 receptions. That was his second most on the season. So it's not like Taysom Hill refuses to throw to running backs, and I do think they'll look at the film and they'll be like, listen, like, we won this game, but we need to get Alvin Kamara the ball in space a little bit more than we did. I mean, he needs more than the one screen pass. Like, they've just got to get him involved. And so I think that, yes, Alvin Kamara has significantly less value while Hill's the quarterback. It is possible that we only see this for a few more weeks. And I know the trade deadline is past for a lot of you, but let's say you're watching this and your trade deadline is Thanksgiving. I know that is in a lot of leagues. I don't think you're panic selling right now, because you never want to trade Alvin Kamara after a 0 reception game. Like, that's just going to, in the back of everyone's mind, it's going to be there, and so you're not going to get as much. But he has a lot of name value. And so if you could sell Alvin Kamara for like top 5 overall player value, like I'm talking, you're getting Travis Kelce, you're getting Aaron Jones, you're getting Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, you're getting these types of players, okay. We're going to talk about that now, because over the next few weeks, he's significantly less valuable. And then even if he goes off in the playoffs, you got to get to the playoffs. And so if you're in a situation where you need to win, maybe do these trades. But he is still Alvin Kamara. They are still going to use him in the receiving game, I believe, moving forward. And if Brees comes back, week 15, week 16, well, guess what? Those are the weeks that matter. And so if Brees is back in your semifinals and finals, you will not have wanted to trade away Alvin Kamara. So it depends on your team. Are you in a situation where you need to win? Are you in a situation where you've already clinched the playoffs and you're just looking at the championship? That's going to determine what you do with Alvin Kamara. But again, while Taysom Hill's the quarterback, I think he has significantly less value than before, because Taysom's mobile. And Taysom's going to take off. And Taysom's not going to have a lot of the pass volume that was there with Brees, and certainly not as many of the dumps. And so he has a lot less value, but hopefully in the playoffs, he'll still go off. So those are my thoughts on different running back situations you guys asked about. Remember to ask any other questions in the comment section, especially if you have questions for wide receivers, since I'm doing that video tomorrow. And if you want to tweet your questions at me, you can do that as well. Nick Zylak, FFA on Twitter. But that, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.